And while we're waiting for your SMSs, while you're answering, why don't you give us your views on the Paralympic Games? Because that's what we're going to be chatting about for the next half an hour or so. Joining us in studio is a man that's been very busy for the past month and a half. Manfred Seidler went straight from the Olympics into the Paralympic Games. We're coming to an end now. Closing ceremony at 9:30 this evening. And joining us in this conversation is renowned sporting scientist Dr. Ross Tucker. He's down at the University of Cape Town. Dr. Ross, good afternoon and welcome. And Manfred, good afternoon.
Thanks, Nick. How's it going? Manfred, hey.
Hi, Ross. How's it?
Good.
Well, guys, we have been spoilt for the past month or so. First of all, the Olympic Games and then the Paralympic Games. It all comes to an end this evening when we pulled the curtain down on the Paralympic Games. Don't forget this moment of pride and inspiration brought to you by Sasol. To send your messages of support to the Paralympic Team South Africa, visit sasolwithyou.co.za. Manfred.
Sure, yeah. It's been hectic, hasn't it? But if we look at how Team South Africa has performed, it's quite interesting to see if we go back to 2008 and we look at 2012 now. It's been an amazing ride for the Paralympians, and I think there's a number of things that have come out in these last 12 or so days. One is that the Paralympics are becoming very professional. You can see it for a number of reasons, both on a commercial aspect as well as an athlete point of view. Getting medals is a lot more difficult. There's a lot more Paralympians out there. And come 2016 and 2020, the whole picture in terms of the professionalism of the sport is going to be very, very different to what it is right now.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really noticed in the comparison between London and Beijing 4 years ago. I mean, I watched Beijing 4 years ago and I wondered, geez, technology is getting so crazy that you're seeing the sports at an angle, you're seeing the sports at a view that you would never have dreamt of 10, 20 years ago. Fast forward 4 years and it's a completely different ballgame with social media and I'd really say they're coming to the fore of the internet and the coverage of the games.
It is. I mean, and also in terms of rights packages, the BBC were the rights holders for the Olympics, but it was C4 that was the rights holders for the Paralympics. So it's not, you don't only now as a broadcaster buy the rights for both Olympics and Paralympics, you now actually have to specify. And there were some 100 million viewers around the world that actually saw the Paralympics, which is up from 4 years ago. The Paralympics sold out. Basically every single ticket was sold out. Yeah, they brought the prices down. You could get tickets for £10 compared to what you were paying for the Olympics. And I mean, a seat in the Olympic Stadium, if you wanted to watch Usain Bolt, in some areas would cost you £500. As far as I know, the most expensive seat in the Paralympics was £50. But you had 900,000 more tickets sold in the stadiums than you did in Beijing 4 years ago. That's just the amazing growth of the sport. I have to say, though, and we will be obviously touching on this, is that one of the reasons why that stadium was sold out is that the Brits went on an amazing marketing campaign. I was there last year in September, and if you walk through the tube stations and if you walked around and you saw posters everywhere already announcing the Olympics and the Paralympics, and Oscar Pistorius featured very, very prominently in those advertising marketing campaigns. He is an absolute icon in the UK, and I think worldwide he's got a massive following. I think we know that. So they milked that situation. And I actually just saw a tweet now from one of the journos over there saying that Trafalgar Square is waiting for Oscar Pistorius. And there's no standing room in Trafalgar Square right now. He's obviously making an appearance there, but there's no standing room. That's the massive appeal he has, and that's the marketability. And the next step after Oscar Pistorius is going to be more people like him. And all of a sudden, the Paralympics will be a massive entity in their own right, as compared to Olympic Games.
Well, I'm glad you've touched on Oscar Pistorius. Let's call him the elephant in the room, so to speak. A lot of controversy over his silver medal in the T24 200 meters. I'm going to bring you in on this one, Dr. Tucker. Oscar's initial response to that loss to the Brazilian, Oliveira's win in the 200 meter and the T44. Very unfortunate. He even came out and agreed and said that he wished he hadn't said those things straight after he lost. But what's your take on it? Do you think that the Brazilian had an added advantage over the Blade Runner? And if that is so, isn't it a little bit ironic that Oscar's been campaigning for so many years, saying that, my blades, they give me no added benefit whatsoever. I'm just coming out, let me compete in the able-bodied Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, look, the latter two questions you asked are simple questions with complicated answers. When you allude though to like an elephant in the room, for me, it's not Oscar who's the elephant in the room. It's now two athletes, because the Brazilian is now introducing or forcing us to ask the same questions as we had to ask with Oscar Pistorius. And that's really what that event did, was it introduced us to the slippery slope that I think a lot of people felt that we might be on when we first made legal the use of those carbon fiber blades for able-bodied athletics, because I'm fairly sure that in the next few years, at least Oliveira will also run as an able-bodied athlete in those events, and there may well be one or two others. The floodgates have now been opened, and history will record, I think, that Pistorius was the pioneer who introduced Paralympians to running those events, and perhaps by 2016, maybe by 2020, we'll be seeing a handful of athletes who are all able to cross over in the same way that he has done. I think to answer your question, though, it's more than a little ironic, because effectively what he was doing there was giving a tacit acknowledgement that the use of technology could improve performance. And what he was asking us to believe was that someone else had done it, but not him. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case, because I would argue that every single one of the double amputees, or even single leg amputees, has the opportunity to get their prosthetic limbs tested, optimized. They're able to choose the specifications. There's a host of things that they can try and alternate or change in the prosthetic limb design, and then run in that way. In Oliveira's case, we saw it very clearly. It was a change that happened publicly. We saw its effect. But that's exactly what's going on everywhere. And I think for Pistorius to suggest that he had the advantage and Pistorius himself hasn't in the last 4 years or 4 years ago was maybe where it was misleading. So I think that the technology in general is the elephant in the room and needs to be addressed.
You know what? At the end of the day, though, people are still going to come out and say you're arguing over disabled athletes' ability to compete. And at the end of the day, should we be allowing these athletes into the Olympics in the first place? Is it going to get to a point where they are going to be faster than men who have a so-called full ability with no amputee, no amputations or anything like that?
I think so. I mean, I've gone on record as saying that I think that within our lifetime, possibly sooner rather than later, we will see that the winning time at the Paralympic Games for the double amputee category will be faster than the winning time in able-bodied athletics. And that shouldn't surprise people too much, because we see winning times in other events being faster, and this is an extreme comparison. But when you look at wheelchair marathon or wheelchair 800 or wheelchair 5000, those athletes win considerably faster than the able-bodied runners do. Now, that's extreme because we're comparing wheelchairs to running. But the point is that the technology can change the perception around performance, and I think that will happen. So then the question again will become, do we cross them over? Because, and this is the touchy thing that no one wants to acknowledge, but the implicit assumption that we have all made with regards to Oscar Pistorius is that without the technology, he would have been a 45-second 400-meter runner. If we are correct, then fine. No one else will come along and run faster. If we're not correct, and if someone else comes along in the future who is a 45 and he runs 4 or 5 seconds faster, then it'll become obvious. And we don't know what the future holds, but I think they will get considerably faster.
Yeah, it's actually quite intriguing what Dr. Tux is bringing up here. I mean, if you look at last night's 400 meters, there was only one person, it was Oscar Pistorius, and Alan Oliveira was nowhere. No doubt we'll get onto that just now, but the one thing that I wanted to raise has already been calls for the Olympics and the Paralympics to be held simultaneously. And that's just going to be unbelievably hectic, unbelievably long, and it's going to dilute both games as far as I'm concerned, because you had 500 gold medals up for grab in the Paralympics. You've got 300 up in the Olympics. So that boils down to all the different categories. Now, if you're going to start introducing Paralympians to compete at the Olympics, let's leave aside the technology side for an instance and so on. All of a sudden, what is a 2.5 week extravaganza of sport, and it is going to turn into 6 weeks back to back. No one can digest that. It's just absolutely too long. It's going to be exorbitantly expensive. And how do you start streamlining that? The question then arises, what categories do you throw out? Do you amalgamate all these categories? It becomes a farce. And that's a very real question that's being touted out there. The other thing, of course, with regards to the technology is, let's say they do amalgamate. And let's take this hypothesis of Dr. Tuck a little bit further. Let's take the 400 meters. The guy who won it, I can't remember his name now, the junior, also won the World Championships.
LaShawn Merritt answered.
No, LaShawn didn't run this year. It was the junior from the Bahamas. I can't remember can't quite remember his name.
Which event are you talking about?
The 400.
At the Olympics?
Yes.
Sorry, not LaShawn Merritt, Karani James.
That's him, thank you, Karani James.
Yeah.
Now, he went and ran sub 44. Let's say the winning time is a 43.5 for argument's sake, and able-bodied. And along comes a double amputee and goes and runs 41. How do you start comparing? Where do you draw the line? David Radisha ran the 800 meters in 140.91 or something like that. He took 8 athletes to running under 144. That was the greatest ever 800 meters I've seen in my life. I think anybody's ever seen in their life. What will happen when we start, when technology advances to the point where these guys are running 135s? You've got to ask yourself the question, where do you draw the line? And before we started the Paralympics, you and I spoke about, should we compare them? And I don't believe we should be comparing them. I think they're two separate entities, and I think both sets of athletes should be celebrated in their own right. But technology is playing a big, big factor here. And I mean, if we look at last night's 400 meters, point in case.
All right, so if you've just joined us, you're on SAFM Sports Special. We are chatting to our Paralympic correspondent, Manfred Seidler, and renowned sporting scientist from Cape Town at UCT, Dr. Ross Tucker. Myself, Nicholas Bauer, with you until 6 this evening. We're chatting about technology in the Paralympic Games being used by athletes, getting in the way of their achievements. I mean, are their achievements as good, if not better, than the able-bodied competitors in the Olympic Games? Stepping away from the technology for the moment, though, gentlemen, can you say a gold medal at the Paralympics is maybe worth that little bit more than a gold medal at the Olympics? As though in many cases competitors have to overcome a lot of adversity and do it in spite of so-called disabilities.
Manfred, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, all right. It's quite intriguing you raise it. I mean, I go back to my argument that we shouldn't be comparing the two of them. It's like comparing apples to pears. It's comparing a Ferrari to a motorbike. I'm sorry, I make a distinction between Paralympics and Olympics because they are so vastly different. The other thing that we also need to bear in mind is, and I keep bringing this up, is that it just really, really struck a chord with me, is when I spoke to Ernst van Dijk in 2008 before he left for Beijing. He turned around and said to me, a lot of the athletes that we see in 2012 and in 2016 have not yet had their accident. So the whole progression in terms of overcoming obstacles and training as a young athlete coming through junior ranks, senior ranks, etc., from an able-bodied perspective, they're completely different. Natalie du Toit will turn around and say to you that, losing her leg, she was always a really good swimmer. Same with Shireen Sapira. Always a really good swimmer, was hoping for the Olympics. Question is, would she have achieved the same success at the Olympics that she would have had at the Paralympics? The answer to that is simply we don't know. And therefore you actually can't compare them. And I think it's actually, again, I think it's unfair to do that. You can't turn around and say that the one gold medal is worse than the other.
It's a defeating exercise, and for me it actually devalues both. Because as soon as you put them up against one another, what you will invariably do is you'll put the good qualities of one up against the bad of the other, and you'll end up making them both look bad. Because I would ask the analogous question is Andy Murray wins the gold medal in the Olympic Games. He beats the same field as he would have had to beat in the Grand Slam title. So he's beating the best in the world. The guy who won the sailing race and Usain Bolt have also done the same thing in their respective spheres. Do we value Bolt's medal more than we do Andy Murray's? You can't make this comparison. So I honestly think people should just celebrate them for what they are. We're celebrating Natalie du Toit or Oscar or Ilse Hayes or Fanny van Melle as the best Paralympic athletes in the world at this moment for themselves, and we can celebrate Usain Bolt in the same way without detracting from either.
Spot on. I think that's absolutely spot on.
Well, okay, let's turn our attention away from who's better, who's greatest, what's more important, to how Team South Africa did. Obviously, let's forget about our Olympic game achievements. I think we did very well. That's a discussion for another day. Paralympics, though, look, we didn't do as well as we did in Beijing. Our medal tally, 8 golds, 12 silvers, 9 bronzes, 29 in total. We finished up 18 overall. That's a bit of a slide down the scale from where we finished in Beijing in number 6.
There are a number of reasons for that, and I know Dr. Tucker will jump in on that as well. It's quite simple, is that if you go and look at let's just focus on the gold medals. We came back with 21 gold medals in 2008. So we had a total of 30 medals, 21 of which were gold. 5 of which went to Natalie du Toit. 3 went to Hilton Langenhoven. 3 went to Oscar. And then we start going down the rank. 2 to Philippa Johnson, 1 to Shireen Shapiro, 1 Elsa Hayes, 1 Ernst van Dijk, Fanny Lombard, 1, and Kevin Paul, 1. But if you now take out Natalie du Toit, Hilton Langenhoven, Oscar Pistorius, you're taking out 11 medals. Natalie du Toit came back with 3 golds and a silver. The competition has upped immensely. If you look at the amount of world records that were broken, Kevin Paul, to me, on paper, and I called the race a couple of nights ago in the men's 100 meter breaststroke final. As far as I was concerned, that was a gold medal for the taking. Same with Natalie du Toit's last race, because on paper and according to the times that they'd come into the final, they were streaks ahead of the rest. They were beaten by world records, and they weren't just beaten; they were beaten quite substantially. And the point is that the gap has not only been closed, we're also relying on athletes who've... Natalie du Toit has done 3 Paralympics. Like Michael Phelps, this is it. She's got a lifespan.
End of her tenure.
Correct. Oscar Pistorius came back with 3 gold medals. He's come back with 1. Let's leave aside the relay because that's a joint team effort. He was beaten in the 100 meters. In fact, he finished outside of the medals. He finished 4th. He always said he's not going to get he can struggle to get a medal there because he's focused on the 400 meters, and it was so evident. So the point is he now has to specialize as well. He can't go across the board anymore with 100, 200, 400. Hilton Langenhoven got 3 golds last time. It was the pentathlon, the 200, and the long jump. There was no pentathlon this time, so he went for the 400 and the 200. He finished out of the medals in the 200, something where he finished top of the pile 4 years ago. The competition the gap has closed, and there's an element of professionalism that's coming into the sport itself as well. And I think Team South Africa needs to be careful. SASCOC has put a lot of money into the disabled athletes, more so than in the able-bodied athletes, in preparation for London. But we're being left behind.
Would you agree, Dr. Tucker?
I would, and I'll tell you what the concerning trend is. I mean, there are good things that have come out of London, and I'll touch on them shortly. But I'll tell you the concerning trend is if you go back to Sydney in 2000, our total medal haul was 38. In 2004 in Athens, medal haul was 35. In Beijing, it was 30, and then obviously in London now 29. So there's been this consistent decline, which would be of concern if you were analyzing this in the same way a business would analyze it, call it profits. But the Beijing Olympic Games were the anomaly because to win 21 out of 30 medals gold is a sign that you have got just extraordinary athletes. And Manfred mentioned a couple of those names. You think Natalie, Oscar, Hilton, Fanny van der Merwe is one he didn't mention. That was also 2 golds. Just looking at those 5 athletes that he mentioned, they combined produced 17 gold medals for us in Beijing and only 7 in London. So immediately that's 10 medals that have gone. And that doesn't account for the fact that they will continue to move on to other areas of their lives as they retire from the sport. So I think there is some cause for concern. The other thing that I would be concerned about is that we are so reliant on athletics and swimming, in particular athletics. That's always been the case, but never more so than it was in London. On the plus side, we have discovered some young athletes. Diane Bass, for example, came back from London with 3 medals. He's a young guy who would like to then turn those 3 medals into golds by Rio, and I think he can. Bauer in the pool was a 3-time medalist. Liebenberg in the 400 for T46 won a medal and the 200. So we've discovered these young athletes. But the problem is that as time evolves, unless we put systems into place that invest even more, we will find our Paralympians facing the same obstacles as our Olympians do, which is just that we compete against professionals with an amateur mindset and amateur levels of support. Now, the Paralympics in this country for a long time were carried largely by athletics, and I know Suzanne Ferreira, who works out of Stellenbosch, and she can really take so much credit for what we've achieved, but we need more of the same. And the way that the trend is going is of concern, and we have to do something to knock that curve back up again.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and also the other thing, of course, is that it goes back to the other point that I made before, is that a lot of these athletes have not yet had their disability, have not yet had the accident, and so on. So how do you start developing these athletes when they have not yet even arrived on the scene? It's a tricky situation. The other thing that's come out, and I think maybe that's a step in the right direction. I'm not a great fan of incentives. I think it's great to have, but I think we need to be careful of incentivizing athletes and then they go there because of the incentives. They need to go there and find out the incentives are a bonus. And what it seems to have come out of London today is the fact that the Paralympians' incentive money will be equal to that of the Olympians, which prior to them leaving wasn't the case. And I think that's step number one, is that we need to start looking in terms of parity, in terms of rewards, but we also need to start looking in terms of parity, in terms of development, in terms of developing. And this is where Dr. Tucker is bringing structures into place. It goes beyond that. It also goes in terms of being able to get these athletes to go and compete overseas. Oscar Pistorius is a full-time professional athlete, and he's making a lot of money out of being a professional athlete. He's the exception. He's not the rule in this country. And it needs to be the other way around. Some with all the other athletes to be in the able-bodied scenario. They also need to be able to be professional athletes, be able to make money out of it. But that's the step we need to get to.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Again.
Where does the government put their money, though? Where do we decide? Should it be equal funding for Paralympians and Olympic projects as well? Is that the rule that we should follow? Because let's be honest, I mean, we were talking 5 minutes ago about, what's more prestigious, an Olympic gold medal or a Paralympic gold medal. Number one question we need to answer, where does South Africa want to see success? Where do we put that money?
Well, the interesting thing is I go and look at the model that happened in the UK. And the UK, specifically for 2012, turned around and said, which are our sports in which we do really well? Athletics, swimming, cycling, etc., on both fronts, Paralympic and Olympic. And that's where they pumped their money in. They didn't say, all right, we've got 26 Olympic sporting codes. Every one of them is going to get equal amount of money. No. They looked at the ones where they would come back with the most amount of medals and where there's the biggest amount of depth in terms of the sport, basically, and see where there's long-term growth. And out of that, they then hope that the lesser-known sports, or the sports that are not getting as many people and are not doing so well, there'll be an upsurge in terms of people participating. And as soon as you've got that, you start getting more medal potentials. I mean, I'm talking more participants at a younger level. So, it kind of rises through the pyramid, so to speak. And I think that's what we need to look at. We need to focus, and I know I'm going to get lambasted for this, because you're going to get, for argument's sake, darts, for argument's sake, which is not an Olympic sport. They'll turn around and say, why should athletics get more funding than darts? And somewhere along the line, you have to play hardball, and you have to draw the line and say, look, guys, we need to get these sports into the mainstream. We need to get these sports to get the same publicity as cricket, rugby, and football, which they don't do. And as far as I'm concerned, I find it quite insulting. So when these sports get termed minor sports, you go and tell Chad Leclos that he won a gold medal in a minor sport in Olympic Games. I think that's the biggest insult you can possibly give any of our medalists. But the point is that we need to get an interest in those, what people call the minor sports, and the non-mainstream sports. And the more interest you get, the more athletes, more people you get participating, the more funds you can start looking at generating in there. But somewhere along the line, I mean, it's not a bottomless pit. So you have to actually turn around and focus where, and I know that SASCOG are looking at this very, 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 very strongly, is that where's our best performances? Let's focus on those and then start expanding on those events that's not the best, we were not at the best at this point in time. And let's start the ball rolling. It's a long-term process. It's not 4 years. It's not 8 years. In fact, it's 20 years plus.
Would you agree, Dr. Tucker?
Yeah, and the biggest issue, the root cause of having to go that way, is that we don't have this unlimited pot of money. The resources are scarce, not only financial, but human, facilities, infrastructure, all of them. They're all scarce. And so what you have to do is, let's say you take, for round number's sake, 100 million rand. You have to allocate that in a way that will produce the best possible return. Again, this is the same as taking money to invest in the stock market. You look for where you're going to get return. And the way to get return in sport is two things. Number one is to develop expertise, which is sorely lacking, I think, in South African sport. For the first time ever, the Olympics have shown that we can produce homegrown talent, for example, with Chad in swimming as a result of his coach, Graham Hill. The rowing gold medal was the one that I was most excited about for that reason. And the Paralympics have shown us that. So we need more of the same. We know what to do. Let's go and do more of it. And then the other thing that has to be done, and Manfred alluded to it, is you've got these young athletes, 18, 19 years old, who are considering whether they can embark on a career either in an Olympic sport or a Paralympic sport. In order for them to do it and to sacrifice 8 to 10 years of their life, we must recognize that they are giving up some other opportunity elsewhere. They could have gone to university and studied. They could have gone and gotten a job at perhaps a family member's business or something like that. And if you want them to dedicate themselves to winning medals for this country, you have to make it worth their while. Not with incentives, but with the right kind of support so that they can see the gold medal at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. So it's a combination of spending in those two areas, and you can't do it everywhere. You can't throw 100 million rand to 60 different sporting codes if we combine Olympics, Paralympics. Knowing where those medals will come from is not rocket science. We know, as a country, where our strengths are. We just have to have someone make those hard decisions and then figure out how to best spend that money in order to help those athletes achieve the 8-year or the 12-year plan, because that's what it is. Key question always is, there is, at this moment in South Africa, maybe they're listening to the show, but there is a 14-year-old in South Africa who in 8 or 12 years' time will be our next medalist. Where are they, and what are we going to do about them? It's really that simple as a question, delivering a little more complex.
And you asked about the government, and the government's money, it shouldn't only come from the sports ministry. And this is where I'm really, really impressed with the sports minister, Fikile Mbalula. He's badgered, bullied, pushed, cajoled, begged, whatever you want to call it, the Department of Education to bring back sport as a physical education part of your curriculum. They took that out, and the minute they did that, I think it was in 2003, our base of sports people across every single sporting code, and I'm also talking about the so-called Big Three, just immediately went from, let's call it 100 million to 10 million. You immediately made it a hell of a lot smaller. And bringing that back, so it's not exactly not only putting money into elitist sport, it's actually putting money at that's grassroots level. And that's where they need to put them on. It's not up to the federations to do that. They don't have that kind of money. They can provide the expertise in terms of coaching, and that's maybe what they should be focusing on. But to get the masses to participate, to get a healthy nation and therefore more potential athletes, I'm afraid it starts at school level. And I think that's going back to your question, what should government be putting money into? I think that should be the first port of call.
All right. As a final word there, Dr. Ross Tucker, do you think we're going to do better at the Olympic Games in 2016 and the Paralympic Games in the same year? Have we got it right? I mean, after that disaster that was the 2008 Beijing Olympics, are we seeing signs of SASCOC and the South African Sports Ministry and the country at large waking up?
We're seeing signs, certainly. 4 years ago we were doing post-mortems or autopsies, and this time it's almost, the mood is so different, it feels a little bit more like a christening or a baptism, in the sense that we're looking forward as opposed to looking backwards. The decisions that get made in the next 3 months are going to determine the answer to that question. I was chatting with some of the guys who were involved in winning us that rowing medal in London, and they were saying that they would love to build on what they have achieved. But in order to stay at the top, you have to do twice as much as you needed to get there. And we have to recognize that, and we have to see that those 6 medals could so easily, we're talking hundredths of a second. For Chad, it was 500ths of a second. For the rowing boat, it was 0.005%. That was the difference between gold and silver. These are the margins we're talking about. And so if we are complacent, and if we think we've arrived, then we will go to Rio and get 1 medal. If we learn those lessons, and if we invest because of them, and we continue to make the difficult decisions, then I think there are signs which will have us celebrating again in Rio. But there are also signs that have me concerned. And it'll be what happens in the next 3 months that determines which direction we go in.
I would agree with that. I mean, I spoke to Gideon Say at the end of the Olympics, and I asked him the question, as far as I was concerned, you did really well. You got 6 medals. He says, did you succeed or fail? I said, I promised 12. We failed if I was the CEO in a corporate world. And the next question I asked him was, you promised 12. You said if you don't get 12, you will jump on your sword. Will you? And he goes, that's up to the board. They basically have to do the elections coming up in November to say yay or nay. My answer to that is, I would like to see him stay, and I'd like to see this EXCO, the executive committee at SASCOC, stay. Yeah, they've got their faults. Every administration has their faults. It's just never perfect. Point is, they've started something. They did 3 years of investment. They've learned from that. They know that some of the investment was not well investment. Some of it didn't pay off. Ruben Ramalefe, they spent a lot of money on him. He didn't even qualify to the games. Chad Leclos was always a 2016 medal hope. He went. He came back with medals. Leon Fourie in the 110-meter hurdles. Athletics South Africa to beg, borrow, plead, steal, cajole, force them to take him. Look what he did. He not only got to the final, he went and ran a 13.28 in the semi-finals, which was his second fastest ever. He's now recently broken the South African record, which has stood for over 11 years. They gave him an opportunity, and that's an investment that's going to reap rewards. So Dr. Tucker's quite right. The next 3 months are crucial. I know that SASCOG have turned around and said that they're not quite happy with the model they're looking at right now. That they've had over the last 3 years. They want to tinker it and fine-tune it. The one concern I have is, yes, we've got this homegrown talent that did really well, which was Chad, and amongst them the Rose and so on. But to me, for the Rose to perform and to repeat that performance in Rio in 4 years' time, they need to be spending more time competing overseas. They had a 6-week stint. They got a silver medal at one of the World Cups, and next thing you know, they're Olympic gold medalists. They were the unknowns. They're not anymore. People are going to watch them. So in order for them to improve, they need to be competing a lot more internationally, and that's the next step that we need to look at. So we also need to look at athletes being able to go overseas and compete internationally. Don't focus so much on what's happening here. Yes, we want to see our heroes in action here, but the bigger picture is that Olympic gold medal, or any Olympic medal for that matter. And in order to do that, you need the competition. And Leon Fourie, although he didn't get a medal, he turned around and said to me, if he hadn't gone to study in the States, he would never ever have broken 13.5 seconds for the 110-meter hurdles. He would never have been in that final, and he's now the South African record holder. And he's this close to breaking 13 seconds for the 110-meter hurdles. So there's pros and cons on both sides.
Oh. Yeah, and I would say there that the fundamental issue is the people. And we can talk about the competition, and that's geographically we're always struggling because we're isolated from the European season where you can sort of harden your skills and your mental approach to the sport. But the fundamental issue is people, and we need to create a situation where it's not in the best interest of the athletes to emigrate in order to succeed. And the only way to do that is to reinvest intellectual capital into the sport here in South Africa, and then make sure that we support our guys to stay here. And that means money, yes, but it means primarily expertise. That's the drum that I would be beating for the next 2 to 6 years, in fact.
Well, nobody said it was going to be easy. It's only going to get harder from here on in. I'm glad that we went to the Olympics. We came back with half of what we set out to do, but at least a vast improvement on Beijing 4 years ago. And I think our Paralympians can also hold their heads high. Gentlemen, absolute pleasure having you on the show. Dr. Ross Tucker, renowned sports scientist, live from Cape Town, and our Paralympics correspondent here, Manfred Seidler. Manfred, go off, have 16 beers and just enjoy yourself. It's been a very busy time. We'll see you in 4 years.
There's a nice pub down the road. When you're off, we can join me.
Fantastic. Right. Coming up next, the news at 5 with Vic Nation, and then more sporting action between 5 and 6 on SAFM Sports Special. On SAFM Sports Special. On SAFM Sports Special. On SAFM Sports Special.